And then lastly, the idea about risk, you can have crazy, wild risk. You can go gambling, or you can take risk that's based on some information and some experience. And we think that intelligent risk-taking is very important and is, again, a good characteristic of a learning culture. So just to close, as I said, we did a year-long project on social impact assessment. We developed a lot of materials that we hope will be useful to you. The address for our website, where you can find all of these tools and download or find the electronic version of our report, is at SSO, which stands for Social Sector Office, sso.mckinsey.com/social impact. We created a database, the Tools and Resources for Assessing Social Impact, the Tracy database, which has 150 tools, methods, and best practices. It's available through our website or with our partner organization, the Foundation Center. The report, as I mentioned, can be downloaded from the website, and hopefully you can take hard copies back with you today. And then we developed an interactive workbook which helps an organization develop an approach for social impact assessment. And there's a beta version of the workbook online now, and a much better, much more user-friendly version will be available by the end of the summer. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Laura. I'm holding all my comments so everyone gets a chance to speak, and then we will have the discussion. So Jeremy.
Thank you. I'm going to be the one who fails the technology test. We'll have a go.
I will come to rescue.
Thank you so much. I have to apologize. There was a while this morning when I didn't think I was going to make it, what with flights and one thing and another. And Durreen will know why that was quite so stressful for me. I wasn't going to have got it here. I'm there, we're here. Yeah. We're there.
We did it.
We did it. Great. So, morning, everybody. This is the bit of the day where we do the community singing. Okay, so this is the kind of, we're going to sing along to John Lennon's song, Imagine. Okay, ready? Right. No, perhaps not. But that's what I want you to do this morning with me just a little bit, is imagine. And imagine a couple of things. And the first thing I want you to imagine is you're waking up tomorrow morning. There is no more financial accounting. It's gone. Great, eh? Actually, there's no more auditing either. That's also gone. And what happens as we kind of stagger out of bed is that we decide we will have a world where we can have any number of ways of doing financial accounting. Everybody can do their own thing. All the investors say, well, you can account for your financial results however you want. We've got a few ideas, there's some resources here, but you get on with it and do your own thing. And you know what? We won't ask anyone to check whether what you've done is reasonable or not. We'll just take your financial report. What a fantastic world that would be. Can't wait, eh? What do you think would happen tomorrow morning in the investment markets if that was the case? That is what would happen. Investment would fall off a cliff. It would be, they would just vanish. It would be chaos. And yet, that seems to me to be the world that we live in when we're thinking about social impact. A world in which the investors often say, well, you can account for your social impact in the way that you think is appropriate for your situation. So there are many ways of doing this thing, and somehow that's a good thing. And I think it's absolutely not a good thing. It's a disastrous thing. What we want to flip round is to imagine the scale of investment that might be possible if we could imagine a different world. Wolfgang this morning was asking us that question, which I think is a really important question, about how is it that so much of what's happening in financial markets is going on. And here we are in a relatively small area worrying about these things, whereas most money is flowing around financial returns. They're flowing around financial returns because there is that framework which allows us to account for a particular type of value. It's a financial value, and it is also, of course, part of a type of social value. It is a value in our society, and we should not forget that. But that's where it all flows at the moment. So let's imagine a different type of world now. Let's imagine a world in which we have resolved all this debate, this question, and we have sorted out the balance that everyone's been talking about, this balance between how do we have ability, but how do we have enough standardization? We've now sorted that. We can now actually communicate with each other in a much more standard way. despite the fact that they're obviously hugely different types of organization, creating hugely different types of value all over the world, and just to stick with financial reporting for a second, we use the same approach internationally. Now, if there's accountants in the room, I'm sure we can have a big argument about the subtle differences between one thing and another, but broadly, all over the world, we use the same approach to accounting for financial value, the same principles and the same framework. So we're now going to imagine a world where we have achieved the same thing. And there's some bits we're going to need in that world, and we're going to need to compromise a little bit if we're going to get there, because otherwise we're all going to be sitting there going, I have the way, I have the answer, and you don't have the answer. And we're never going to get that ability to communicate unless we get over some of that. So what do we need? Well, we do need some more consistency. We need a lot more consistency than we have at the moment. And given that you're all nerds, as we were pointed out at the beginning, I'm sure you will understand the difference between having a framework for understanding what we should measure is different from a list of tools about how we should measure. Now, I run into the problem all the time of people saying the challenge we have is that there are so many ways of doing this. Well, actually, that's not the case. There are increasingly very few frameworks for asking ourselves the question, what should we measure? And I think the principles that underpin that are becoming more standardized. Once you've decided what it is you should measure, obviously you need to find some way of how you should measure it. And if you're measuring the same thing, it makes sense to use the same indicator, providing you're measuring the same thing. In which case, things like IRIS are very, very useful because they help us get some consistency, some standardization around how we measure the same thing. But first of all, we have to get the consistency around what it is that we are going to measure. And that, as absolutely has been said a couple of times as well now, needs to be good enough. What was the phrase? The rigor in reason. It should be no more than that. We do not need to answer this question by getting a piece of work that we can bang out in a 4-star academic journal. Sorry, Alex. We don't need to aspire to a science-level test of truth. Financial accounting does not do that. It is not a science. It does not follow that paradigm. It's good enough to allow people to communicate their financial results across the world. And we need something that's good enough. And we should do the minimum necessary in order to be able to account for this wider impact. But it needs to be hard enough as well. Because I see so many stories where people are not really answering your questions. The questions I think underpin what difference have we made, what value have we made. And I'm just going to pick out some of what I think is going to be part of the hard enough. We have to answer the question, what would have happened anyway? Something would have happened if we hadn't been here. There is an issue about a benchmarking, a counterfactual, this question that we flagged up before again. We don't need to do randomized controlled trials all the time. We cannot possibly achieve that. But if we at the same time just go, because we can't do that, we won't answer the question, we won't think about the question, then we're not ever going to know whether we're making a difference at the good enough level. So we absolutely have to ask ourselves what would have happened anyway. We absolutely, I think, have to differentiate between an organization being clear about its objectives and managing that, which is absolutely great, and recognizing that in pursuing that objective, you will change things in all sorts of ways. And some of them are nothing to do with your objective. The language you'll hear is unintended, negative consequences. But actually, these are core. It's just important. If we're going to account for our impact, we need to understand that what happens is bigger and wider than just our objectives. Otherwise, as bad stuff is happening, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, we heard this morning again, exactly because of this. I want to do that, and I do not look at all the other stuff that happens. And the third one I would flag up is we absolutely have to start our understanding by listening to the people whose lives are being affected by our work. That doesn't mean to say we end there, but we should start with what was the constituent voice or stakeholders. Absolutely have to be at the beginning. Why should we know in our look where we are, what it's like, what has changed at the level of somebody's life in very different circumstances? And it's dangerous to assume that we do. So they're kind of, those are the good enough, the hard enough, but the consistency. So that's all very well and good, isn't it? Because we all agree with that, but what's good enough for me may not be good enough for Laura. What's hard enough for you may not be hard enough for me. And so that doesn't really help. So that's why we started a network, a membership body around social return on investment. as a membership organization so that we can resolve that from a bottom-up debate, so that people can get involved in this question, and that we say, yeah, there is some standardization so that we can agree that what is good enough actually is something we have to start to share. What is hard enough is something that we have to start to share. And my job increasingly is sitting in the middle of the this is too easy group and the this is too hard group, and trying to get a balance where we start to share an idea of what we actually mean. And that is what financial accounting achieved over the several hundred years that it's been at it. It's achieved a community which has shared a view of what is good enough and what is hard enough in order to be able to communicate our financial value. And if we can achieve the same, where we are going to have to compromise a bit, then I think we can get to a language where we can seriously start to understand the social value, the social impact that we are having. So we've started a network around that. The other piece I think we've put into this is, I don't have this up on a slide for you, so you're going to have to take notes at this point, is our database that opens this up to everybody in the world. It's called Wiki Voice, where voice stands for values, outcomes, indicators for stakeholders, a voice for people, if you want, where anyone in the world can add to that resource what they think their stakeholders are, their outcomes, their indicators, and their values. And we can crowdsource, if you want, this conversation about what good enough looks like, at the same time as having these processes which are coming down from the top. And just maybe, if we can start to recognize that we have to achieve this, we have to. You know, this isn't the kind of, it was the nerdy bit. This is not the really innovative or exciting, well, it is innovative actually, it's not exciting, it's not so inspiring, it's not the kind of really sexy bit of this discussion that we're having, but it's so important that we get to this place where we actually can see that we live in a world where most investment flows into those activities that actually are creating more social impact and are not creating the levels of environmental degradation and social consequences that we're currently seeing. Because I don't want to live in a world which isn't engaging with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. We had a fantastic array of ideas here, and I just want to do a quick check on time. It's 12:05 and 12:07. I know we have gone over time, but we started late, so if it's all right with all of you, we have 2 hours for lunch, so I will keep you for 10 more minutes if you don't mind. So there will be food there. So I think just to sort of quickly, just in one line to summarize, it's very interesting how impact assessment is viewed by the different parties, even just sitting here on the stage. I mean, Sanjay looks at impact assessment from the investor's point of view when they're looking at investing, right? And looking at obviously large organizations, what kind of impact they're having, a lot of it in microfinance and now beyond. Fabio, you're looking at it from perspective from your portfolio and really requiring your portfolio companies to embrace impact assessment. And Laura, you're looking at obviously organizations, how they're embracing impact assessment, which is very important. I mean, going back to the $10 trillion that the wealthy have here in Asia, I mean, that's something they should be looking at. And then obviously with the work that Jeremy is doing in terms of standardization. So I think, what I want to sort of pick up on is where Jeremy left off in terms of standardization, and this is something that we deal with day in, day out, which is bringing the common language, and how can we then take this field of impact investing to the mass? And we struggle with that because obviously now the investors we work with, they're all high net worth individuals. We would like to bring it to retail, and in order to bring it to retail, the mass has to care in a way that they understand, what kind of investment they're getting into. So what's your thought in terms of how do we actually bring it from up there, to down here for people to actually understand, for each one of us on an individual level to be able to make an investment based on the impact, not having a fund, not running a big organization, but really sort of going to that level of an individual. Sanjay, do you want to give us some thoughts?
Well, what you're talking about, Durreen, is really a paradigm change. I believe it's starting to happen. When we first launched microfinance rating in the late 1990s, nobody had any idea what we were talking about. Where had this thing come from? We were well ahead of our time. And this has happened with a number of things that we've been doing. The rating